I'm John Jannarone with Healthcare Edge here at the New York Stock Exchange. I'm very happy to be here with Marc Hedrick, who is the CEO of Plus Therapeutics. This trades under the ticker pstv. Marc, thanks for joining us today.
Hey John, thanks for being here.
So Marc, I'm really happy to see you because I in fact had the chance to write a pretty in-depth article about your company last year, and what you do is something I'd like you to explain to our viewers in your own words, which is very targeted type of therapy for brain cancer. Can you explain a little bit about how that works?
So in simple words, we develop targeted radiotherapeutics for central nervous system cancers. What does that mean? So we take very energetic, high doses of radiation, we liquefy them, and then we put them directly on the tumor. And so the way we formulate it, it stays on the tumor, it delivers all the radiation and then gets absorbed by the body. And there's essentially no toxicity anywhere else in the body. So you get very high doses, like 10 to 20 times the amount of radiation than you can get with typical forms of radiation that are used today, like external beam radiation therapy.
Great. Now, unfortunately, there are all kinds of cancers out there, but you're looking at just a couple that are in the brain and can be a little bit hard to reach. What are those two? And tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so we saw the opportunity several years ago to use targeted radiotherapeutics for central nervous system cancers, which, by the way, have some of the worst outcomes. There's kind of the most unmet of the medical needs, and these patients really don't do well. It's a death sentence oftentimes when they're diagnosed. So we've developed the way not only to develop a drug that will deliver those high doses of radiation, but also a way to get it there in a highly targeted fashion. So these CNS cancers you kind of break it down into two types of cancer: the ones that start in the brain, and then the ones that start elsewhere, like breast cancer, melanoma, and go to the brain. And we treat them both.
Gotcha. All right. Tell me about the benefits of looking at these cancers versus others. I mean, would your technology work for other types, or is it really, sort of bespoke and targeted for these guys?
It essentially would work anywhere in the body. But where we think the opportunity is to develop these therapies is in CNS, because the outcomes are so poor. And there are two real problems with getting at the CNS. One is the real estate's very valuable. So you've got neurons, you've got glandular structures, you've got motor pathways and speech centers and so forth. You have to be incredibly precise with how you deliver it. Second thing is something called the blood-brain barrier. It's a membrane that keeps 98% of the drugs that patients typically get out of the brain. So we have a targeting methodology to get past the blood-brain barrier, but to be very precise. And so that's why we think we're kind of an awesome merger of technology on the delivery side that's out there and a novel therapeutic in the targeted radiotherapeutic space.
Great. And if we could put a number on that, is the total addressable market, the TAM, pretty big for this? I'd imagine it is.
So one of the diseases we go after is glioblastoma, and that's what people think about when you say brain cancer. They mean glioblastoma. That's actually a relatively small number of patients. It's about 15,000 patients per year.
Yeah.
But they don't do well. They always recur. It comes back. It's probably about a $2 billion total addressable market. Another indication we're going after is a metastatic form of brain cancer called leptomeningeal cancer. That's a $4 to $8 billion market. There's nothing approved for those patients. They die in 4 to 6 weeks after diagnosis, and even with treatment, like physicians will throw the kitchen sink at these patients, they still live a few months.
Gosh.
Big, huge need.
Yeah, sure is. Tell us a bit about your pipeline, and do you have a portfolio of patents?
Yeah, so we developed the pipeline over 4 transactions over the last few years with the idea that the CNS space had a lot of opportunity to improve patients' lives. So there's 4 transactions to kind of build a portfolio that it's all patented, it's all proprietary, and it allows us to deliver the radiation in different ways. So we can come at different cancers in different ways at different stages.
Yeah.
And so we think longer term we can address any form of malignant neoplasm or cancer of the brain and the spinal cord.
Great. Now there's some recent news I want to talk about. CN side. Tell us what that's about.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we've done 4 transactions. The latest was on Friday. So this is related to a cancer called leptomeningeal metastasis. So patients have breast cancer, lung cancer, melanoma. While the local cancer might be controlled, cells pop through the blood-brain barrier, get into the fluid around the brain, and then it's incredibly difficult to treat. So that's what we're talking about when we say leptomeningeal cancer. Leptomeningeal cancer has 2 problems. Not only is there no therapeutic that's approved, but there are no good diagnostics. The diagnostics that are out there are the same ones I used 30 years ago when I was in medical school. So we found what we think is the gold standard test. The company has struggled a bit over the last few years, so we wanted to solidified the availability of that test going forward. So we have a non-exclusive license to the test. We can convert that to exclusive license in the radiotherapeutic setting, and it allows us to have a biomarker. A biomarker lets us, at any point in time, sample the cells in the brain fluid and tell where the cancer is. Is it a high degree of cells or low degree of cells? We can tell how our therapy's doing, and we can address in our therapeutic to when the cells bump up. We can decrease it down with a therapy. So it really gives a lot of flexibility. We wanted to lock that up. And I think it's a great thing for the company.
That's terrific. Now, Marc, can you get government funding to help you execute these things? How does that work?
Well, it just so happens 60% of our burn is covered by the government.
Wow.
Both the NIH and there's an initiative in Texas called CPRIT, which Texas is actually the second biggest funder of cancer research in the world behind the NIH. And so we have an $18 million grant to develop the leptomeningeal indication I just mentioned all the way through phase 2. So 60% of our burn is offset by that. So it really makes us very capital efficient in terms of how we operate the business.
Great. Now, there's a conference coming up in November, the SNO conference. There's some data readouts on the way. Can you give us any kind of clues about what to look for there without spilling the beans?
Yeah. So I mentioned leptomeningeal cancer and also glioblastoma. So we hope to have our phase 2 interim data from our glioblastoma trial kind of ready to present and discuss with the medical community. So we'll be there on the podium presenting that data. I can't really tell you what it is, but I think that the trend has been very positive with that data. The therapy is shown to be safe and potentially effective, and we'll update the medical community at that time.
Great. Now you got to help me perhaps with the pronunciation of this. So rhenium obesometa.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
So we have 2 drugs. That's our primary drug. So the indications I was talking about a minute ago, leptomeningeal cancer, glioblastoma, we use rhenium obisometa to treat those. So what it is, it's a rhenium isotope. That's the source of the nuclear energy. It's actually made in a nuclear reactor.
Wow.
And then we chelate it, we package it into much larger lipid envelopes. And that totally changes how the drug functions. Wherever you put it, it stays. It stays for the full decay cycle. So that's the primary drug. The second drug that we just licensed relatively recently is called a radioembolic drug. And so it's a drug that goes anywhere in the blood system through a catheter. You put it just upstream of the tumor, you deploy it, it sits in the blood supply, plugs up the blood, delivers all the radiation, and then it gets resorbed by the body and reestablishes blood flow. That's an exciting new drug. It's still early, we're not in the clinic yet, but you'll hear more about that soon.
Great. Now, Marc, let's step back and address this from an investor's perspective. We've learned a lot about the science and the wonderful work you're doing, but when you talk to investors and they ask, why should I invest in your company, what do you tell them? What are some of the best reasons? Well,
so look at targeted radiotherapeutics in general. I mean, this is something that's in the upswing. There was a therapy many years ago for iodine treatment to the thyroid that was radioactive. That really has become the gold standard, but there hasn't been a lot that's been developed in targeted radiotherapeutics until recently. Now you've got big companies like Novartis, Boston Scientific in the targeted radiotherapeutic space. You've got expansion of well beyond the thyroid, all over the body, including us. There's really nobody out there that's targeting these CNS indications. We're the only one that has a portfolio of indications in the CNS. So, and those are the big unmet medical needs, and they're multi-billion-dollar markets. So we can, as I mentioned, on a relatively low burn, a very efficient use of capital, we can develop drugs for markets that are multi-billion-dollar markets where there's a significant unmet medical need. And oh, by the way, that there are significant funding sources outside of the capital markets that we can deploy to develop these in a very shareholder-friendly way.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because that was going to be my next question. Tell us about your access to cash to keep funding this drug development. How should investors look at that?
So for the last 3 or 4 years, when capital was a lot more available than it was right now, we scaled down the company. We thought there might be a tough funding environment, around the corner. So we scaled the company down. We minimized our burn. We wrote grants. We got grant funding in place. Minimized our costs so now the company is well funded. We've got cash, well through next year, arguably beyond that with our grant funding. So we haven't been out to the capital market since 2019. We did a financing in 2019. And we haven't done one since. We don't have any plans to do one anytime soon. So just continue with our being smart about our burn, being very focused in what we do in terms of drugs we develop for these indications. And our goal is to partner our lead drug. So we're actually actively involved with discussions with firms that are interested in our mid-stage pipeline and potentially partnering those. So that provides new non-dilutive sources of capital potentially for the company going forward.
Great. All right, Marc, one last question. What can investors look forward to when it comes to milestones for the remainder of 2023 and looking into next year? Are there several important things that investors can hope to look for?
Yeah, so on the data side, I mentioned for glioblastoma. So we'll present an update on our lead trial, a phase 2 drug for glioblastoma. That will be in November. We're also in the process of publishing the phase 1 data, and that will be ready. Hopefully that'll be a peer-reviewed journal article summarizing the entirety of the phase 1 data. As it relates to our leptomeningeal cancer trial, so we finished part 1 of the part A of the phase 1 trial. We think that maybe by the end of the year, early next year, we'll have part B of the phase 1 done. So we'll kind of have a comprehensive data set on the phase 1 of that, which is really a co-lead indication. And that's probably got maybe towards the end of this year, the early part of next year.
All right, Marc, we're going to leave it there. Marc, this is terrific. I really enjoyed having you here at the New York Stock Exchange. This is Marc Hedrick, who is the CEO of Plus Therapeutics, trades under pstv. Marc, thanks for joining us.
Thanks John.
I'm John Jannarone, signing off the New York Stock Exchange.